Hey guys, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be the Game Week 31 cheat sheet, and we'll be looking at the assets and how I view them before the European fixtures. As far as disclaimers, do keep in mind that we have some United injury news to follow up on in terms of Shaw and Rashford, so tracking whether Shaw and Rashford can come back to our teams before Game Week 34 is essential to me. If we get any additional news that they can come back by 34, I would advise keeping these two players in your teams. However, if you don't like the shape of your team or you need some immediate transfers out, or the injury situation seems extremely dire, such as Shaw and Rashford can't come back to our team by Game Week 35, then I would consider transferring them out this week. As far as some other injuries, you have Barnes, but you also have to look at, for example, any European fixtures and any sort of potential injuries that might happen as a result of them. So I would, of course, advise holding off your transfers until probably Thursday, unless your player has already played. So such as, let's say, going for Grealish tonight, if you really wanted to go for Grealish after the Bayern Munich game is completed. As far as the actual cheat sheet, though, for the midfield, Martinelli rises, and there are multiple reasons why Martinelli deserves a rise. Potentially, you could even argue for him to be a green asset. The reason why I haven't done that is because I still think that Arsenal assets aren't necessary as essential as we previously thought, because I am assuming that a lot of managers have a 3 at 32 in play. However, if you don't have a 3 at 32, then Martinelli, of course, becomes a green tier asset in your minds, because simply put, the Game Week 32 fixture is stupendously good. However, if you have 3 at 32, then it's actually about comparing these Arsenal midfielders towards a City midfielder like a Grealish, like a Mahrez. And why is that interesting? Because Game Week 31 seemed to be fantastic for both these two teams. Leicester is going to be a fantastic fixture at home at the Etihad, of course, for these Man City assets. However, the concern, of course, is that they might be rotated. Grealish, for me, is the person who's most impervious to rotation because of the current injury condition with Foden, and also Grealish simply actually getting consistently more minutes this season than in the previous year with Pep. Whereas with Mahrez, we've seen a constant around this time of year where Mahrez will actually not play as much Premier League minutes due to actually being involved heavily within the Champions League games. As far as Gundogan, he is a little bit of variable for me still. I mentioned how he can drop very deep at times, and that will negatively affect whether he looks interesting from a sort of ceiling point of view as an asset, and therefore I still think he's a second tier asset. However, when you compare, let's say, Grealish to Martinelli, that Game Week 33 game is just essential, right? Because that's a game where City get to play Arsenal at the Etihad and at home, and therefore I am actually hedging myself in thinking that City will probably overwhelm Arsenal in that game. I'm not putting it past Arsenal to actually score at the Etihad, but I really think that City will probably win that game quite comfortably. So those are my thoughts right now on the game state. So you have to kind of look at options like Game Week 31 and 33 and consider whether you have a 3 on 32 or not, because for me, Arsenal assets are clear if you don't have a chip remaining. As far as Barnes, he drops because of the injury concern. Nothing else really to add there. Leicester simply have been a diabolical team. And, even though we're looking at a fantastic run of games between Game Week 32 and 34 for both Maddison and Barnes, they both have to drop for me, because you're still looking at teams like Brighton, teams like Arsenal, who have assets within similar price points that are incredibly better at the attacking point of view, and the underlying stats will bear that out. But Leicester now being at the bottom of both XG and also XG conceded, even with the change in manager, just spells out trouble for me, and also just lack of value now that we've overcome, I guess, that Leicester double period. So I would be thinking about transferring these assets out sooner than later, as long as you have a replacement in mind. As far as Saka, the reason why he drops is just because I feel like with Martinelli now being so much more of a stronger asset, and now Jesus also coming back onto the table, you have a situation where Saka may not be as essential as we thought. We also have a lot of space in the midfield that we need to accommodate for. So you can see assets right below in the premium tier, such as a De Bruyne, such as a Salah, and that I feel like we would all prioritize towards very, very shortly. So those are the types of assets that I would try to spend my team value towards. And because you have Martinelli easily accessible at a much cheaper price, that sort of reduces the strength of Saka as an asset, as he doesn't have any doubles in hand. So if you look at options like these premium tier assets that all have doubles in Game Week 34 and all very considerably good doubles, that's what makes them a lot more powerful than a Saka for me, particularly, of course, if you are on a 3 hit 32 trajectory. Now, if you don't have a 3 hit 32 trajectory, I just think Salah becomes the above and away clear asset within the premium price point. And I'd think about maybe going towards from Saka to a Salah if you could, with whatever team budget you have available. Going to Salah, for example, through Kane is something that I wouldn't really advise until Game Week 34, if we're being honest. As far as the forwards, though, we can now see that Vinicius is someone who does rise. And what I was saying in the previous week was that last week was a good week to actually see what would happen system-wise with Fulham with Mitrovic being out. Could we see, for example, a false nine being played? Do we see Vinicius getting consistent minutes? And I think that last game sort of tells us the direction of where we'd like to think with Fulham. I think Vinicius getting 90 minutes, not getting subbed off, was the positive sign that we need to suggest that Vinicius is going to be a very, very good make weight option as we look into the future. Now, even as soon as game week 31, Vinicius can already be a good transfer, but I wouldn't really recommend, as I said, going for that sort of transfer from Kane to Salah when Kane actually probably has a better fixture this week in game week 31. So if you really wanted to do that, I think it would only be if you're the type of player who doesn't have, let's say, a free hit, and we're thinking about that sort of transfer towards Salah in game week 32. However, if you do have a free hit, then I would actually recommend delaying all the way till game week 34, just because Kane actually has, on paper, some pretty good fixtures, and getting to play United at home is going to be a considerable upgrade to, let's say, playing United away from home. So that's nice for Kane. So that's why Vinicius rises. As far as Tony, the reason why he's risen again is because we are now almost halfway to the end of April, and there hasn't been any additional news or suggestions that Tony would be suspended. I know, of course, that Tony asked for the media to, let's say, keep it a private matter, but the fact that nothing has been since reported about Tony makes me think that he could potentially continue to play football. And keep in mind that the suspension threat through the yellow cards is probably going to be something that he evades as long as he can survive game week 31. So Tony actually re-rises as an asset. And if you look at his fixture list, I mean, game week 34, that Nottingham fixture looks incredible. I wouldn't say the next three fixtures look extremely good from the ceiling, because these are all teams that are capable of being able to defend quite well. However, Tony, as you know, is also someone who is central to, let's say, Brentford and whatever goals they score. So even if they were to score one goal versus these opponents that are somewhat better as defenses compared to some of Tony's peers in this kind of territory with, let's say, Watkins and Jesus, for example, I do think Tony is very close to them as assets. And that Nottingham Forest fixture is probably, if he, let's say, doesn't get suspended from football for whatever reason, another time where we think about going back into Tony in game week 34. As far as Havertz, he has to fall. And that's simply because with Lampard coming in now, we were talking about how there was a high chance he would get less minutes in the system with Lampard being more willing to actually experiment with other players, and also maybe just simply not as confident in Havertz and his goal scoring abilities, and also his abilities to play as that striker. Because right now this Chelsea team is still lacking in goals. Now, I already spoke about how I wasn't confident in Lampard given the XG statistics that he was able to pull out with Everton in his previous tenure there, but given that the Chelsea team was already probably poor from the finishing and we're still amassing good XG, now with Lampard, I'm probably expecting worse XG on a game-to-game basis, less minutes for Havertz, and also simply what is actually a constant with Havertz in the last few years in the Premier League, which is that he is an underperformer of finishing. So that's why Havertz has to fall for me, and Felix has also been taken out of this list for this reason, because I just think that Lampard will rotate too much and take away too many minutes from this Chelsea team that already has very, very tough fixtures and a blank in 32. As far as Darwin, the reason why he's still not a green asset is because with Firmino, for example, dropping a good performance, and also just Jota and Gakpo being fully fit and ready to play, that does take away from Darwin and his expected minutes. Keep in mind, of course, that Luis Diaz will probably eventually find his way towards starting in the Leeds game, and that will take away from Darwin's minutes. However, I'm still very high on Darwin as an asset independently. When you actually get to see him play, when he gets starts, or even if you look at his statistics on a per 90 basis, that already shows that he is a lethal asset when it comes to creating chances. Now, he is still a very poor finisher, and last match, when you actually saw one of the key chances that Salah slipped Darwin in late in the second half, and you see Darwin, let's say, take an additional touch and take a shot to Ramsdale's body, that wasn't really much of a confidence booster for me when it comes to actually looking at Darwin as an asset. Simply put, it does seem like there still is a mental block around his finishing this year. Whether that will change in the future is something that I'm totally open to. But for now, I still wouldn't consider Darwin really as an asset to think about, since the options at 7.0 to 7.9 are just exquisitely good. And 9.0 plus, no changes there, with options like Kane and Haaland being superior. And also just so consistent on a week-to-week basis. And fantastic, of course, that Haaland is now back in our teams. As far as the defense this week, the one change that I have is really just shifting up these Newcastle assets. when we look at the fixture run, they don't have any blanks. They have Southampton coming up on game week 34 in a week where a lot of people will have a double game week. But the reality is the people who have double game weeks are also players that we probably will only have one defender from. So if we look at Brighton, you probably will have one defender there. With United, you might even actually have De Gea, or just someone like Shaw who's ready to come back into your team. So therefore, Botman and Burn, these are, and even Shaw, for example, these are your fourth defenders in your team. So you're not really concerned about whether you have to play them or not. I think they still have a fantastic fixture. If for whatever reason, let's say you still have to deal with things like the Shaw injury, or you're not concerned, or you're not certain about which City defender to go for. So I feel like these Newcastle defenders, because they're also such a good defense overall, are just going to be fantastic options to keep as your 4/5th defender options going forwards. As far as Mings and Alex Moreno, the reason why they fall for me is the fixture run starts to get very, very tough for Aston Villa. Looking at the games ahead, Newcastle, Brentford, the only good game being Fulham, really, especially now that Mitchell is out, and then of course Man United away. Those scream to me as worse fixtures, and it only gets worse as the season goes on. So I think if you have benefited, for example, from owning options like Mings and Alex Moreno, where they've managed to kind of sneakily get these clean sheets unnoticed, I would actually say that there's still options to think about transferring out, because there are slightly more higher potential options that seem to be a bit more interesting when it comes to, let's say, looking at the doubles in the future in Game Week 34, and also simply going back to, let's say, an Arsenal defender, if that's your wish. Just look at these really consistent assets on a week-to-week basis, just like Newcastle. So those are kind of my thoughts on Mings and Alex Moreno. Whereas Zuma and Martinez, these are still interesting options because they have doubles coming forward. I don't really like Fulham from a defensive point of view, but I have, of course, mentioned that Leno will appear in the cheat sheet, and that's already been the case. So he's the one Fulham asset that I would think about from the defensive point of view, just because he could actually rack up a lot of saves. Whereas with the defenders, you're kind of hopelessly wishing for a clean sheet in one of the worst double game weeks in the future. So that's why Fulham doesn't feature here. As far as Shaw, of course, still an asterisk there, and Van Dijk has been added towards the cheat sheet, whereas Chilwell and James, I've sort of assorted them towards the same territory. No sort of moves there. I don't want to preemptively move Chelsea towards the orange territory, just because I feel like they're still a very capable defense when it comes to the personnel, and obviously if Conte is actually ready to play consistent games, now that he'll probably get match fitness under his belt with the Real Madrid fixtures coming as well. And Trippier and Alexander-Arnold still are the clear options for me. Now, Alexander-Arnold played a slightly different role in the second half in the Arsenal game. I feel like we shouldn't jump the gun in terms of whether he's actually going to fully move into the midfield full time or something like this. But playing in the right back position, as long as he's able to actually get coverage from the fence, and of course with some of the easier fixtures coming up and also some doubles, inevitably Liverpool will get some clean sheets, particularly with the form of Alisson this season, with him being such a top shot stopping keeper. So I think with Trent and the ceiling that you have there with his underlying statistics, very comparable to someone like Trippier, who's a top option. These are the two defenders I would think about certainly going towards in the future. With Diaz, Ake, and Stones in the tier just below at 5.0, 5.4, my main concern with them really is price point. Now, I put Diaz, Ake, and Stones together now. Of course, Diaz is a 6.0 asset, so that's going to be something you have to consider. But Ake is probably the one asset that I think will actually get more nailed on minutes, because Stones will be rested during these Champions League matches. And so I've added Ake towards the cheat sheet there, but there's still going to be this luck element, right? Because you're never going to be able to call correctly week to week who's going to get benched from the City lineup, because Pep could see, for example, that this Leicester game seems to be a rather easy game and find it as an opportunity to finally play Laporte, who's been riding the bench for a long, long time. And therefore, although the Leicester game screams fantastic clean sheets on paper, that could be an opportunity where, your options like a Diaz, Ake, Stones may not feature, or may not even feature for 60 minutes. So that's my concern there, but I still have to inevitably put them towards the top end of the assets, because even getting a gambling chance to get these clean sheets, and also these players who are also really good at actually being on the end of set pieces that are going to be delivered by, great players and great creators like Kevin De Bruyne, just means that they're still worth messing with, if that makes sense. So that's sort of the lay of the land with the defenders. But if we move towards the goalkeepers, it's exactly the same as last week, although I have dropped Kepa. Now, I've talked about Leno a little bit briefly in terms of how he's a little bit more interesting, and why him and Raya actually feature on the goalkeepers list here, because they are the shot stoppers and the savers of the season who actually get a lot of their points from that, whereas their defenses, by comparison, are really just living and dying by the clean sheets. As far as Kepa, with Lampard coming in, with the blanks, with the tougher fixtures coming in for Chelsea, I just think that it's the time to sort of drop, let's say, the strength of Kepa as an asset. And if you could ever move towards Ederson or some of the more interesting assets like a Steele, for example, then you could actually save yourself a lot of transfer value with Steele, or you could simply just hedge yourself with one of the best defensive options in Ederson. Now, of course, he hasn't gotten as many clean sheets as we hoped, but you'd hope that Man City and their ability to actually keep the expected goals conceded low, despite actually conceding from one shot on target almost every other game, would spell good clean sheets and good points for Ederson owners. But if you're not so interested in that, I still think De Gea is going to be a very close second and a perfect option now that Shaw is injured for now. So that's going to be the cheat sheet for this week, and I hope you guys have a wonderful week ahead. So I'll see you guys next on the team selection video.